We are at an epic intersection with Pluto squaring the nodes with incredible implications that extend well beyond this month and year, month of July. Hello, everyone. This is Irlianna Samsara, StarSound Speaks, StarSoundastrology.com. UFOs, religion, power grabs, power struggles, it's all there. Pull up a chair. We're going to have some deep dive conversations. I am so excited because guess who we have here? Dan Waits of World Astrology Report. Well, hello, Dan. Welcome.
Hey there. Thanks so much for having me.
May I say, I love your channel and congratulations. It's your first anniversary. You have 20,000 subscribers. That's so exciting. So Dan is a consulting astrologer, a researcher and content creator focused on mundane, electional, and natal astrology. Dan's goal is to use astrological wisdom and historical research to understand the times we're living through and help more people cross the threshold into a magical cosmos. I'm in. And his writing on mundane astrology can be found on worldastrologyreport.substack.com. I'll put that link below. And his YouTube channel, as I said, is World Astrology Report. And his website for bookings and contact is danwaitesastrology.com. So welcome, Dan.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here, Irlianna.
Yes. So I always love to ask people when they're new to the show, it's like, how did you discover astrology? You said you had worked as a humanitarian aid worker, and now you're an astrologer. So how did that happen?
Yeah, no, that's true. I spent about 10 years working for a humanitarian organization, and that work took me all around the world. And I lived in some places like Thailand and Myanmar, Fiji, Papua New Guinea. And when I first got into this work, I wasn't really into things like astrology, honestly. I didn't really grow up being into it. And I'd say I had a fairly, sort of commonplace kind of, materialist perspective of how the world worked. But I spent a long time living in some of these places in Asia that I just mentioned. And these are places where magic is very real. People, your average person really does believe, or not just believe, but knows that there's a world of spirit out there, as well as things that we see every day. And I just, over time, I think that that way of seeing the world just kind of sunk in, because there's only so long you can live in an environment where everybody really believes in magic and, the world of spirit. And you're kind of sort of thinking, well, they must be, they must be onto something here. Gradually you just kind of start to question, well, I don't know that my perspective is right. Maybe this perspective is right. And over time, I just became much more open to the, the sort of alternative ways of viewing the world, and particularly like the possibility that, that there is a world of spirit, that the universe is fundamentally magical in some way. And that took me to things like the I Ching, for example. I used to divine with that. That was kind of my first experiment with this kind of thing, with divination. I remember, even feeling a bit kind of naughty doing it, because it's a little bit.
I love that. Naughty. All right, for all the Americans out there, all right, what's the real reason why I had Dan on? No, we really love your accent. No, but, you felt naughty because your friends weren't into this. Were you finding like, okay, I don't want to talk about this because it's kind of weird?
More that it felt like I was kind of formally throwing my hat in with the ranks of like the irrationalists, people who believe in stuff that you can't see and that kind of thing. So I felt like I was just kind of, taking this sort of step into a very different way of seeing things that, it felt like slightly naughty at the time. So I got into the I Ching, and then later astrology caught my eye. So I started learning about astrology, and I could definitely see that there was something there. It seemed to speak to me. It seemed to say something. For example, when you learn to try and read your own chart, and you see things there, and you read things on pop astrology websites, and you're like, I can see something here. but I'm not completely convinced. But I read a lot of books about astrology. I practiced, but it was very amateurish at the time. But I did remember reading a lot of astrologers talking about 2020, and they were saying 2020, there's this big conjunction of all these planets, so Saturn and Pluto, and then Jupiter and Mars are also involved. There's this huge lineup of planets, and they were talking about how there's going to be some kind of great transformation or some societal reset. And they were really talking like that huge changes are going to come in 2020, and they're not going to be easy either. And I remember reading all this and kind of being a bit freaked out by it. And I didn't take it 100% seriously. I almost kind of put it to the back of my mind. It was like, yeah, well, maybe this stuff's bullshit, and like none of this will actually happen. I think I prefer that option, so I'll just go with that. And then, of course, 2020 rolled round, and I remembered what the astrologers were saying. And that was really the moment when I was like, okay, I have to take astrology 100% seriously now. So that's what I did.
This stuff works. Yeah. So you're really relatively new to astrology. It's only been about 3 or 4 years that you studied it and like plunged in. You got red pilled right before, in what, 2019?
I've been studying it for a bit longer than that. It's only that time when I've been like a very serious practitioner of astrology. Yeah.
Then you just decided, okay, it's time for me to leave the humanitarian work behind, and you gave yourself to this completely.
Yeah, I kind of felt like I had to. Simultaneous to that, I was also getting a bit disillusioned with humanitarian work, which I think anyone out there who's worked in humanitarian industry will maybe relate to. Like any industry, it has its problems. You start to get disillusioned with it, and that was definitely happening to me. So at the same time as being somewhat disillusioned with that part of my work, I was also completely obsessed with astrology. I didn't really feel like I had much of a choice, really. Kind of just felt like I have to do this. There's nothing else is even close to as interesting or as important to me as this. So that's what happened. And the interesting thing, as I was saying, it was really COVID that got me to take it 100% seriously. And it was that Saturn-Pluto conjunction, right, that really signaled the COVID pandemic that came, the conjunction on January the 12th, 2020. These conjunctions obviously happen every 30 to 40 years. And the conjunction happened at 22 degrees and 46 minutes of Capricorn. And my MC is at 22 degrees and 46 minutes of Capricorn.
Wow.
Like conjunct to not just to the degree, but to the minute.
Holy moly, Dan. No wonder. Holy, that's crazy.
Yeah. And it took me a while to even realize how crazy that was.
Pluto, the compulsion, you're just compelled, and right on your MC, your 10th house, your career, this had to happen.
Yeah, totally compelled. I mean, it was opposing my Mercury very closely as well, because my Mercury's right on the IC, and exact oppositions. I'm completely obsessed by astrology, and I'm totally compelled to kind of go through this death rebirth process in terms of my career, because of course, you know, I'm ending one career and bringing another. So that's my story.
Thank you. You know, that term compassion fatigue, I know that comes up a lot with aid workers and people who are in the humanitarian fields. You just channeled your compassion into a whole nother place, because the fact that you want to help people, as you said, cross the threshold into a magical cosmos. Yeah, we have to have a lot of compassion for the human condition and the desire to assist people. I love the fact that here we are. And by the way, everybody, I was introduced to Dan through my buddy SJ. He's been on, gosh, what, 5 times, I think. All 3 of us, I feel in our hearts, and really all the wonderful people I've been so blessed to interview, so many incredible astrologers. And so I think we all have this thread of this desire as astrologers, all of us in the astrology community, to serve humanity with this sacred knowledge and this being guardians of this ancient knowledge, and to connect the dots for people where it had been the last several hundred years been so suppressed in the rational scientific world. I've decided I've called the age of reason, what was that, Descartes in the 17th century, I call the age of reason the age of treason, because it really did cut us off with that. So I just love the fact that you are able to do it for people with your passion being mundane astrology, which, if anyone's not familiar with that term, mundane astrology, it sounds like it's boring, the word mundane as we know it in the context, but mundane being the astrology of nations and countries, and that's anything but boring. If you've been to Dan's channel, you know, to show the dots and connect the dots. What a great service you're doing. Did you expect this incredible surge of popularity with your channel? Did you think that was coming? Did you ever think you would be in this place? And why do you think people are drawn to the mundane?
The channel has succeeded beyond my expectations, like, and pretty quickly. I kind of thought it would take longer, and I didn't really know when I started doing it if people would really like vibe with it and really like what I was doing. I had this idea that I wanted to make a channel about mundane astrology because it was just what I was really drawn to myself. And one of the reasons for that, and one of the reasons I had the idea, is I just had this vision that this is a kind of type of astrology that you can present in a quite a visual way. You know, we have all the, you know, we're talking about news events, we have video of all that stuff. So why not put that together with astrology and put it out there in a kind of as compelling a way as we can? There's a lot of great astrologers on YouTube, for example, who are really just talking about charts, and they do it fantastically. And I just had this idea of like, well, why don't we try something different and maybe make sort of mini documentaries, make this visual, make it kind of easy for people to understand as well. Because I mean, I do talk about charts and show charts and so on, of course, because you can't really do astrology without that. But I do try and kind of make things simple, really, and make them easy to pick up for a sort of casual viewer. And one of the reasons is I do want to, like you say, kind of help other people get interested in astrology, because it was really important to me and really helpful to me in terms of my worldview and how at peace I felt with the world when I discovered this. Because I think there's a lot of people who are kind of laboring under this materialist vision of the cosmos, where there is really nothing but the economy and maybe your family, if you're lucky, and you just, you know, you go to, you know, you make money, you do your job, and then you die, and that's it. And that vision I find really depressing, because there's so much more to life. And you know, as people who are kind of much more spiritually inclined know. And for me, astrology helped me to move towards that way of seeing the world, and it was really good for me. And I was like, I want to help more people do this and kind of transition away from that way of seeing the world that I personally found quite painful, towards one which is much more soulfully nourishing.
What you just said there about painful, yes, it is. When we don't have that level of consciousness, it is painful. You remind me of, I have a good friend of mine who is an inventor. He's a brilliant scientist and inventor. He totally gets astrology. He's interviewed me on his channel, and he is, and he has said he studies quantum physics and, you know, all of that, Tesla's work. He has said, when you take consciousness out of science, your science doesn't work. And I feel like that's kind of at maybe one of the places where we have this malaise, because deep inside, the science is not, it doesn't work to just look at, oh, you know what, Saturn is this many million miles from the sun and it has a rotation of da da da. I was like, yeah, that's all true and well and fine, but those facts, there's no access to a personal breakthrough or a connection with the cosmos just knowing the weight and shape of Saturn, for example.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that the science doesn't work, and it's painful for the soul to be disconnected from spirit in that way. It's lonely, and we're kind of meant to connect with the divine. I think earlier iterations of science took more account of consciousness, you know, and as your friend was sort of alluding to, but what we've kind of come to today is what you can call scientism, you know, with a capital S. It's science has been sort of elevated to kind of state as a faith, and this faith has its own tenets, right? It has its own assumptions, and some of those things are that there is no such thing as spirit, and it won't even contemplate the idea that there is. And this is kind of part of the problem, I think. And this is one of the reasons why there are a lot of the questions that are important to us can't be addressed by science in its
Mm.
current form. I do hope that we're moving away a bit from that way of seeing things. I get some suggestions that we are, and that there are more open-minded science practitioners out there today.
Think about Harry Potter and that scene, Uncle Vernon. Look, that whole the Potter generation, they even called it, this whole generation that has now come up that read those books in childhood. And and why were they so popular? Well, this world that existed right in our own world, there was this magical world that was overlaid, but most people didn't know it. The people, when you were working in the humanitarian in Asia, you were amongst these people who had that connection. The fact that the collective soul was in pain from this disconnect, and these books did a wonderful service by opening up this world. And when you said about being in pain and science shutting it out, and scientism with a capital S, immediately I thought of that scene in Harry Potter when Uncle Vernon they're always suppressing Harry, and they make him live under the stairs, and he slams the door to the little it's like his little jail cell under the stairs, and he slams that door and he screams at him, and he said, "There is no such thing as magic." So
Right,
I remember that.
exactly.
And that's kind of what science has been dealing with us, is like, you guys are a bunch of hogwash, but it's $1 billion industry now. We have all these apps like CoStar and all this stuff that the generation coming up underneath us, it's like white on rice. They are all over it, and their souls know. They came in knowing like there is this truth, and they're helping to break down all of this thinking that has had us by the neck for 500 years.
Yeah, and I think the tide is turning, actually. The materialists are really fighting a losing battle. We know from quantum physics that consciousness is primary and integral to reality. And then in terms of the things that are just happening in the world today, potentially we're seeing these movements towards UFO disclosure, the UFO phenomenon that's happening right now. This is the kind of thing where these practitioners of this mentality of scientism, they would have told you, oh no, of course there cannot be such a thing as UFOs. We know the laws of physics. It's impossible that any beings could come from any other star system and all this kind of thing. And they tell you that they're very sure of themselves, and you're an idiot for thinking anything else, despite the fact that there are huge numbers of experiences out there. They just want you to believe that all those people have had those very experiences that are completely real to them. They're hallucinating, or they're imagining things, or they're lying, or they're drunk, or all this kind of thing. They're losing ground, and I think it's only a matter of time before they'll lose ground in a similar way in the area of astrology as well.
Trailing what you were saying about the UFOs, Pluto in this place right now, squaring the nodes, speaking to that epic power struggle, power grabs in the collective, seeing it with the fall of dictators, rise and fall of dictators and such, or just leaders and power, and who has the power and where is it coming from. The fact that Pluto's in an air sign, we have not seen in the USA in the Pluto return. It is a wild intersection here, and I feel it too. I think we're all feeling this, like you were saying, this dissolution of this rational world. And Pluto in Aquarius is, it's funny, when I heard Adam Ellenboss, he was on one of these panels and they asked everybody, what do you think about Pluto in Aquarius? And his answer was, prepare for aliens. It's like, yep, oh yeah. So, and here we are. You were talking about Chuck Schumer. I mean, there's this, what I want to chat about here, and it's so exciting to me, is this crazy intersection. Everything that Pluto in Aquarius and this retrograde and is standing on this threshold over the next year, as it goes, it's dipped back into Capricorn. It's going to go into Aquarius again in January, and then it's going to retrograde back one more time. So it's kind of straddling both worlds of where do we go from here with these things, with our future. But there's this crazy intersection, and I want to ask you about UFOs, religion. They've always been intertwined. Talk about power and power grabs and who knows what. And It's just fascinating to me. So anyway, yeah, Renaissance paintings. I remember too. You probably have seen some Renaissance paintings where they have it's like little spaceships drawn in there. So this connection has been around for a long time.
Right, right. Sorry, you mean between the religion and the UFO phenomenon, or what
Yeah,
sort
and politics too. Like you were telling me about Chuck Schumer. If you could share about that, what he's introduced, this legislation, this
right,
top-ranking congressperson, senator.
right. So yeah, just the latest news that we've seen is that Senate leader Chuck Schumer, he is proposing this amendment, which is and it's a bipartisan move, so has support from both parties, and it's essentially going to put into law that information held on the topic of UFOs, or UAPs as they're being referred to now, like, needs to be disclosed. The assumption will be that it should be revealed to Congress, and then more broadly to the public. It's crazy that this is happening right now, and I'm really surprised that there isn't more noise about it. But it is interesting that that is happening right now, with Pluto square the nodes. We've already had that first dip into Pluto in Aquarius, and of course there's something very typically alien that people associate with Aquarius. But I think one thing that makes me think about is how, when we've seen previous Pluto and Aquarius transits, right? If we go back to the 16th century, this is the time Pluto's in Aquarius. Then this is the time of the Reformation, right? So the Protestant religion is coming into being, essentially, and we have something like Henry VIII making himself head of the Church of England, setting up a new center away from Rome, the Vatican. Right, so this theme of new centers being established in Pluto and Aquarius is something that just comes up over and over again. If we head to the next Pluto and Aquarius transit, it's like 1777 to 1798. We have the formation of the United States and its governing institutions at that time. It's a new center being established away from the old center, which was London, the British Empire. And at the same time, we also have the French Revolution. We have the overthrow of the monarchy there, the new center with its kind of centered around the people being established in France. This thing of new centers, and the old center kind of realizing, we're not at the center of things as we thought. That's really the theme that you get with Pluto and Aquarius, right? So now we're back here, and what's happening? We're getting potentially revelations about non-human intelligences. To your average person, this sounds completely insane. But you kind of have to start taking it seriously now, given what's happening with this Chuck Schumer thing, for example. People like him and these very senior politicians are taking it seriously. Now, we don't know anything for sure. Of course, it's always possible there's some crazy kind of psyop happening, but I doubt it somehow. I don't know if these very senior politicians are going to jeopardize their reputations about something that's not somehow significant and real. So, we're seeing this thing happening that almost suggests that it's the human race now. It's us as humans that are suddenly finding out that maybe we're not at the center of things like we thought. Maybe there are other non-human intelligences out there. Another thing about Pluto really being accentuated right now is it's a planet that we associate with the revelation of the hidden, among other things. Great transformations, but things emerging beneath the surface, actually always there, suddenly emerging to transform things. Seems to be what may be happening right now.
Don't mean to interrupt you. Sometimes your mic got a little muffled there. So if you fix the collar, yeah. So
okay.
I didn't want it to cut out, because
Yeah.
what you're saying here is super important.
Is it okay? Do I need to say it again? Or?
Oh, no, it's perfect. That whole thing about the center, and Copernicus too, when he realized, hey, we always thought we were the center of the universe. And it's like, oh, guess what? We're not. So it's the same concept. And with the body of evidence coming out about UFOs, UAPs, they now call them, there's such a body of evidence. It's gone on for so long. Two things I find fascinating. One is very comical, and one is really not. I don't know which one you want to hear first, Julian Assange and the Vatican. But oh, by the way, the chart of the Vatican, This is from Nick Campion's World Horoscope book. It's certified. The chart of the Vatican has Neptune at 28 degrees of Leo in the 12th house. Now, if you think about Venus going retrograde, it's going to retrograde for, 5 weeks? And it's conjunct Regulus, people in power, people at the top, monarchies, kings, monarchs, that kind of thing. When the Great American Eclipse was there, that exact point in 2017, if everybody can remember the total solar eclipse across the country, that point, I remember giving talks about this. You're going to see the fall of, we're going to see child sex trafficking, pedophilia, all of the, and it certainly came out, Epstein, Trump's ascendant, 28 Leo. You can see the connection with all this. But the Vatican too, they had the largest report in history about sex abuse, 3,000 priests over 70 years. They dissolved the statute of limitations that allowed people to come forward who were from 70 years ago that they could prosecute. So this was a huge game-changing turning point about power and control and these secrets and hidden secrets. And here now we have Venus back at that point. So we're already seeing all these indicators of these things that is not going to be squashed and repressed anymore. I know we were talking about UFOs. I'm going to loop back in just a minute. The whole thing with sex trafficking and child sex trafficking, that movie, it's called Sound of Freedom, I think, and with Jim Caviezel, that movie has made $100 million in less than a month. That's more than these Hollywood blockbusters. There is this breaking open that's occurring with the Vatican, with Epstein, Trump. I think we're going to be seeing more about that, maybe even Prince Andrew and the royal family, this crumbling of these big institutions too big to fail. The Vatican is the longest reigning institution on the planet. Thousands of years more than it evolved from the early 800 AD, about when the consolidation of power really started to get underway. Well, here we are, and the royal family too. So all these big institutions, this information somebody said this on a documentary, once there's disclosure, that's the end of the church. Here's the funny part I'm getting to about UFOs. Thank you for this rant. It's all coming out of me. I remember, and this is the comical part, I remember there was this Vatican priest who works with the Vatican Observatory. They actually do have, I don't know if anybody knows this, they have the Vatican Observatory in Tucson, Arizona. And he said, I don't know, one day the Vatican out of nowhere just decided to share that if we ever do find aliens, we must be nice to them and we must treat them as our brothers. I kid you not. They said, we have to baptize them. Like, oh yeah, I'm sure Chuck Schumer with his congressional legislation, that is the top of his list. You know, we get those aliens and we get them baptized. UFOs are not crazy. It's all the delusion around baptism. Thank you for letting me say that.
No, yeah, we do need to baptize the aliens. I hope we do get around to that eventually. But
the matter of world security, Dan.
I agree. You know, one thing about this issue is, I think it's not just the Vatican. The whole thing about disclosure is essentially what we're looking towards is the government's disclosing what it knows about a non-human intelligence. It's going to say, in some way, it's going to admit that there is some non-human intelligence that is present on Earth. And of course, we know fine well that presumably it is much more powerful than the government, right? It has technology that we could only dream of. And so the other implication of that is that it really kind of undermines the people in charge, completely undermines them. We're suddenly thinking, well, you guys are in charge supposedly, but what do the non-human intelligences think about this? Start to wonder if they're in charge. And so it's kind of interesting, this potential disclosure that might come. Is it going to be a controlled disclosure that bends the truth? What we might be looking at is that things are going to come out, but there's still probably going to be some element of spin on this that still lets us think, yeah, the government is in charge, and these big institutions don't need to worry.
Yeah, and the progressed sun being at 19 Pisces, and the moon, the progressed moon of the USA sun, is coming up on this. We have this completion that's very rooted in the chart of the USA. It's this completion of our current system of reality. And it's this dissolution. And like you said, it can also carry with Pisces, as we all know, it can carry deception, a spin, as you just put it. It's very tenuous ground. I mean, not even ground, it's Pisces. It's an ocean we're swimming through. And it's like, okay, there's some sharks out there, but there's also dolphins with highly evolved intelligence. So where do we want to go? And you're right. The biggest worry for most of us with Pluto and Aquarius has been this overgrowth of AI and getting it in check. Jeffrey Hinton, the father of AI, just issued these proclamations. They have all these committees they're speaking, I think, congressional testimony about how we have to rein it in or be some kind of watch guard or safeguards and all of that. And yet then there's this UFO component of the conversation that says, okay, guess what? AI can look puny compared to these giant, I watched Arrival last night. I had been wanting to watch it for years with Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner. These ships that arrive and try to communicate with us. It's just mind-boggling to think, what would that look like? You talk about a power grab. Who's going to team up with the aliens? Is it going to be China? Is it going to be Russia? United States? Whose side can we get them on? Oh my goodness.
This is where it all just gets really hard to make sense of, right? I think the world is particularly hard to make sense of right now. We have Neptune in Pisces, where it's been for more than 10 years now. And I think Neptune's just incredibly strong in Pisces. There's so much similarity between what Neptune is about and what Pisces is about. A lot of modern astrologers will have Neptune even as a ruler of Pisces. Regardless of whether or not you agree with that, it's very strong. So these are really Neptunian times. It's part of the reason, I think, why things like astrology are exploding and all these other spiritual practices. At the same time, there's all these quote unquote conspiracy theories doing the rounds. One person's conspiracy theories is another person's truth. So I'm not using that to kind of dismiss alternative understandings of what's going on. But we're in this moment where there's a lot of ideas swimming around. It's hard to connect the dots. It's hard to see what's really going on. It's like we're in a thick mist at the moment. And then this whole UFO thing is perhaps the most unreal seeming of all of the many things that are changing in the world right now. It's really hard to kind of figure out how it all fits together, especially when you've got this crazy wild card that's being played right now, which is this thing about non-human intelligences and the government itself making new laws to reveal what it knows about them. I mean, who can predict where this is going to go? It's difficult, no?
I looked last night at the ingress of Uranus in Gemini. The last time it ingressed was in 1942, and it was conjunct 0 degrees Saturn. So you could see this suppression by the authorities of this information. But now it's flipped places. Now when Uranus enters in Gemini in 2026, it's going to be in a conjunct, 1 degree Venus. So it'll swap places with Saturn. That's a conversation for another day. But yeah, I think it's certainly going to be different. I would think with Venus there, it'll be friendlier, more polite. Let's hope. This is such a big rabbit hole. I remember when Julian Assange first came on the world scene and the WikiLeaks disclosures, of course, at that time, back in 2010, 2011, he was showing footage of atrocities that no one was supposed to know, of civilians being fired on in the Iraq War and all of that. And everyone clearly was in an uproar. And I remember him saying, oh, if you think these files are outrageous, you should see what I have on UFOs and the government. So he's got something, and it made me wonder, wow, why are they so vehement? I mean, yes, there are very logical arguments for it with disclosure of sensitive information and all, but he happens to also have this. So again, here's this another wild card in the mix.
Yeah, they're making life very, very hard for him. You could wonder, has he kept some cards? And that would be the smart thing to do if you were someone in his position. I think he's one of the people that's played a role in the Pluto and Capricorn story. One thing that you can kind of see and expect from Pluto moving through Capricorn and then Aquarius is that in Capricorn, it's more about transforming institutions that are already here, revelations about those institutions which maybe undermine them and force them to change or change how people see them. That's the sort of Capricorn piece. And then the Aquarian piece is more kind of, well, okay, so given what we know about that, what new stuff do we want to replace that with? It's about the new center, the new structure appearing. And I think, yeah, Assange came in on the scene quite early in the Pluto in Capricorn transit, and he's played a really important role in that process that's kind of taken place, where we have kind of been shaken in beliefs in quite a lot of different institutions over that period.
Yeah. First, it was with the surveillance and Edward Snowden coming out with all that of like, guess what? We're all being spied on and nobody knew it. These people upsetting the apple cart. But now we're on that bridge with Pluto and Aquarius. And here's Chuck Schumer. I have to wonder that maybe it's somebody, I don't know if it's Assange, I haven't looked at his chart lately, but it makes me wonder that as soon as Saturn went retrograde in Pisces, boom, that's when Dave Grush came out with the Pentagon Insider. Also, when those aliens on the lawn in Las Vegas, same few days. So it's like busting. It's like something's about to break. And I just wonder that maybe Schumer is doing this. You have to wonder, is it because somebody else is about to come out and they have to beat them to the punch in true Plutonian fashion? Who's going to have the upper hand? Just have to wonder.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that a lot of people in ufology are wondering about. They're like, why are they doing it now? There is presumably a reason. There's like a time limit here that's forcing them to do this. And what could that be? I mean, it could be any number of things. It could be what, one of the things you just mentioned. Could it somehow be connected to the sort of explosion of AI somehow? That's another thing that people have been speculating about, because it is rather interesting that this UFO story is exploding at the same time as the AI explosion as well. And, as astrologers, we'll put both of those things down maybe to Pluto in Aquarius, but is there another reason why these things are happening at the same time? There's a lot of speculation about the potential for AGI. There's a lot of speculation about when AGI, artificial general intelligence, is going to appear. Supposedly, when this is a real kind of leveling up in AI. It has the ability to design itself, and there's these ideas about the singularity coming along. This intelligence which can improve itself and will potentially do it exponentially. Is that something that's on the horizon? And is that perhaps somehow connected to the drive towards disclosure of what the government knows about UFOs, or is there some pressure connected to that? There's all sorts of things that could be going on.
We are at such an evolutionary threshold right now. The entire paradigm is just being upended.
Yeah, what's hard about it or exciting about it, depending on how you see things, is how these tectonic shifts are taking place in so many different spheres. We have the technological sphere, we have the geopolitical sphere, and we potentially have the cosmic sphere, the sphere of faith and belief. It's all happening at the same time. And that's what happens at certain really, really important moments in history. And it seems like we might just be living through one of those at the moment.
Yeah. This is not your father's Oldsmobile. Now, I know you don't have Oldsmobiles in England, but that was like an American saying, like, you're in uncharted territory here, people. And here are the ETs that could potentially, and how many ETs are there at ET races? And my friend, the one who is a brilliant scientist, he actually had contact as a child. He would wake up in the middle of the night and he would see these ETs at his bedside and they'd talk to him. But he said it went on for years and there was not just one. There were like many different, I don't know, races, I guess, or different types and different looking. I think of the Wookiee bar and that scene from Star Wars when everybody's hanging out and they're all just crazy different from each other. He literally experiences this as a child. And he said they would talk to him and they would tell him stuff. And one of the things that this ET said is, you people worry too much. You have too much anxiety and you have to learn to calm down or be in your heart. Well, that's pretty good advice. This was a part of his upbringing. So he's always known it because he literally experienced this. And he's not crazy. The guy's brilliant. He's a brilliant inventor and scientist. He represents that synthesis between the world of science and the world of higher consciousness and where the meeting ground here. So yeah, things are about to get really exciting. Saturn, by the way, retrograded right on the USA progressed moon. How do we use this energy? And what's your best advice for navigating these very interesting waters?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. What is my advice? Firstly, something that I'm bearing in mind for myself, and which I think might be helpful to others, is something that I was talking about earlier, right? I was talking about Neptune being really strong right now with this sense of unreality, the world just generally seeing very strange. It's difficult to discern truth from illusion and all of that kind of thing. That's kind of the nature of the times right now. And I think bearing that in mind and just kind of understanding that things aren't meant to make sense right now, I think that's important. Not to struggle too hard against the waves, don't get smashed by them, just to understand that we're in this very difficult, strange moment. And I think to kind of be okay with the strangeness of the times, and again, just accepting that things aren't really going to make sense right now, and that's okay.
And the need to even have to have things make sense.
Right.
You can get rid of that old 17th century age of treason being dissolved, the age of reason. Maybe it's not the age of reason anymore. Maybe it's just the age of having faith in things unknown. What is that saying in the Bible, right? Faith is the evidence of things not seen. To me, it's let's just breathe. It's like, okay. And breathe and allow and watch and be the observer, and to not, like what you're saying, not to identify with any one particular thing, because it is all collapsing. The people who you thought were your friends, maybe they're really not your friends, or the beliefs that you were so invested in. Now that's Saturn in Pisces. In the mid to late 60s, we had Saturn in Pisces, and that's when we had Revolver and Sergeant Pepper and this epic music. I know SJ has talked about that. Make epic music. This is the time. We could channel that uncertainty perhaps into art and music and make some really great things and breathe.
Yeah. Pisces is that sign that has so much to do with the arts, and wherever we find Saturn, that's where things that last are being created. This is why Saturn in Pisces periods tend to be looked back on as real golden ages in the arts. We go back to the mid-90s, that was an amazing musical period, at least. Incredible. It was so, I feel really lucky to have kind of been a teenager at that time. And we have another one in the mid-60s, another all-time great period for creativity in general, music in particular, and all sorts of stuff. So we are in one of those times now. So if you're creative, I've wondered a little bit about what area of creativity might be where the great works are coming from in this period. And a lot of people kind of hostile to AI and some of this tech, and I understand why, and I kind of feel partly like that myself as well. I do also wonder if some of the stuff that this era is remembered for, it might be made by artists who are using that kind of technology. Who knows? So we're going through the rise of things like AI. I think it's good to take a sort of rather neutral attitude to them, be skeptical, but at the same time also to cautiously maybe embrace some of it, trying to ride the wave rather than just kind of letting it smash over you. Definitely a part of me that kind of recoils at technology, and I keep it in mind, I let it be heard, but at the same time, I also try to see the good sides in this stuff as well.
Yeah, there's things that we could be in fear about. It could also open doors that we were not aware of, like standing in that unknown. Thank you so much. This has been a really great convo.
It has. It's been a real pleasure.
I appreciate your time and your generosity. And so for people to connect with you, it's
danwaitesastrology.com. And I'm on YouTube at World Astrology Reports. And I also have a Substack, worldastrologyreport.substack.com. And a Twitter, at DanWAstro.
I love it. Listen to that. Twitter. Dan W, did you say?
Dan W. Astro.
Cool. Well, thank you, Dan. Please do like, share, subscribe if you've enjoyed this content. It always helps the algorithm. Let us know, how are you feeling with this outrageous threshold of opportunity? Where do you see it going? Where do you feel it going? Okay, so all for now. Until next time, this is Irlianna Samsara and Dan Waites. Lots and lots of blessings, and we will see you next time.